Good afternoon. This is Chris Riley with System Source. I'm joined by Dave Ferg, one of our senior consultants and director of technical services. And we want to welcome you to the webinar today, where we're going to be diving into kind of that decision-making criteria between how do you kind of choose between moving to the cloud, in this case, Azure cloud, staying on premises for servers, storage, or whether you do a hybrid. We're going to keep some in the cloud, some on premises, which is, of course, a very popular way of doing things as well. Lots of things driving these changes, particularly obviously with the growth of the cloud in general. But for those with VMware, you probably have already found out that Broadcom has changed their licensing structure about 2 years ago with another significant change last year, which has increased the price on VMware dramatically. Sometimes we've had customers that have gone from $1,000 to $15,000 and other types of very similar or very, very large increases. So that may be also driving some of your interest in today's topic to say, where do we go? Go to Azure Cloud, go on-prem, do hybrid, other thing, Hyper-V. While we won't talk about Hyper-V today, that could be also an alternative if you're looking to go stay on-prem, but move away from VMware. And if that's an interest, you still may get some stuff here, but we can help you dig down into that one separately. So a little bit on the agenda. So I'll do a few introductory remarks today or at the beginning here, and then Dave will jump in. We'll be looking at criteria that you want to use to pick what direction makes most sense. How do you kind of evaluate things like security and reliability, manageability, fault tolerance requirements. Understanding your requirements will also help point the direction for where you want to be. We'll look at just some of the other requirements you may have around flexibility, network, security. How do you determine whether you're ready for it and for which one are you ready? If you're looking at Azure, we'll also touch on Azure cost versus on-premises. That could be a whole topic in and of itself. We actually have a full webinar just on Azure costs, but we can also help you, independently of today, kind of make that comparison between staying on-prem or going to Azure. And then at the end, we'll do some Q&A as well. All right, important stuff here right up front. Pizzas. So if you've asked for a pizza today, hopefully that's in front of you. If not, hopefully the delivery driver is looking for your suite number in your office building or for your address, if you're working from home, that sort of thing. Have that pizza in a few minutes. Just jot down Julie Dellinger's email address, send her an email, and she will be happy to try to solve pizza conundrums. All right, during the webinar today, just a few housekeeping things. One is the audio's in presentation mode, so you'll be able to hear Dave and I, but sadly we won't be able to hear you, but we do that so that any background noises, music on hold, all those kinds of things don't come through to the whole group. But you can reach me at any point through the chat tab. Just share any thoughts that you have there, questions, etc. But if you have questions about the topic for the Q&A, just put those right into the questions tab, just as you think of them, and we'll save those up to the end. I'll read those out to Dave, and then Dave can respond. It also gives the advantage if it's something more in depth, something very specific to your organization that may not be that would be a benefit for you, but maybe not for the whole group. We can then respond to you after the webinar itself to address your question. This presentation is being recorded, and you'll get a copy of that sent to you, as well as the presentation itself. And then there is an evaluation at the end. Takes like 2 minutes. Let us know how we did. That helps us to be able to do better in the future. We appreciate your taking a moment for that. All right, we do have a lot of new friends to System Source, as well as many established friends, so we want to welcome both. So just a little bit about System Source briefly. So we've been around since 1981. There's about 75 of us at System Source, and we work with IT professionals from Southern Pennsylvania all through Maryland down into the Washington, D.C. area, and as well as with national companies that have headquarters typically in this region. So a lot of folks first come to us when they need to acquire new technology. So most of the work that we do is on the data center side, although some work on the end user computing side. So we're going to be working principally with IT professionals as they need to work in that modern data center, whether that's on-prem, whether that's in Azure, AWS, other types of cloud places, co-location, all of those, any place you can kind of put your servers and storage resources, or all of them. are the areas that we will help do design work, what makes the most sense, installation, securing all those types of things, helping monitoring, managing those over time, troubleshooting, all of those types of things are the types of work that we do in that modern data center. But people to acquire technology because they want to improve. So our consulting group, just touching on that one, kind of works on that whole, all those data center related technologies and installing to supporting to specing those types of things. But also we have a training group that trains about 600 to 1,000 people a month and about 600 different course offerings from everything from the whole Microsoft stack. And you'll see an offer for some training for that later on in the presentation, through about 3 dozen other different manufacturers or specific types of technology. So you may see things on Cisco, but you may also see just security certifications, broad-based, not just manufacturer specific. Our presentation systems group does professional AV, so all the Teams rooms, Zoom rooms, WebEx rooms, all the large monitors, projectors, speaker systems, microphone systems, digital signage, all the types of things that that group does. And finally, we maintain all these things, either on a you call us when things go south on kind of a reactive basis under service and support, as well as under managed services where we are the IT department for dozens of organizations in this area. And on service and support, if you need that, you can reach us 7 by 24, whether you have an agreement with us or not. And after hours and weekends, you just follow the voice prompts there. There's a bunch of upcoming webinars. I'll also drop the links into the chat during the presentation today. So we have one on Thursday. It's about cyber insurance. Everybody wants to talk about cyber insurance. This maybe a little bit different take was, what do you need to do to make sure that if you do a claim, you get paid in full? And how do you minimize premiums up front? If you're interested in that, Thursday should be interesting for you. Next week, we'll be diving into Verizon's annual report about security incidents. There's always lots to be learned there and lots of ways for how we can improve our security postures based on the excellent research that Verizon does. Then we'll be looking at Wi-Fi, looking at kind of some of the myths out there to help that you can kind of work around to make sure that you do have a secure and high-performing Wi-Fi network. That's next week from Thursday. And then two more things. One is looking at AI as a security risk and a security tool. It's kind of both, right? So we'll look, is it really a friend or a foe? We'll dig into that on August the 5th. And then I'm sorry, that should say August the 6th. My apologies. So on August the 6th, that will be the one that's setting expectations for a managed services relationship. So if you're looking at that, this will help give you some criteria to evaluate for that. You can reach all these on our website, as well as these will be clickable links, and I will drop them in the chat. And with that, let me hand it over to Dave, please.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for attending this afternoon. We are going to be talking about decisions and the criteria, requirements, those things related to moving to the cloud. Everything that we will discuss today, we have had more in-depth webinars on, so you could go to the System Source site and find those and get some content about the technology that I'm going to be talking about. Today, we're going to move a little higher, looking at more of a 10,000-foot view of the types of things you need to consider when moving to the cloud, anything from financing to business reasons and things like that. So that's where we're heading with this. And I'm hoping at the end of this, you will have gotten some things to consider that you had not thought of before, to either try to plan for your move or to sell your move, whatever it is that you're, that you're in, where you are in your state of decisions at the moment. So we all have something or some things that are driving our interest to the cloud. So you need to kind of know what your priority list and what has the most weight for you. Is it a total cost of ownership? So is pricing the thing that's the highest value? Now, let me just first state as a caveat here, all of these should be on your list, but which one carries the most weight for you? Is it a cost-oriented, total cost of oriented? Are you needing to scale up, down, and be flexible? In other words, is your market dynamic enough that you want to get big and fast when you need to and drop off when you don't? Is security and compliance a problem with you? Moving to the cloud now offers more security features than many of us have on premises. So you could be stepping up your game going to the cloud in relations for security. Business continuity, disaster recovery, is that big on your list? When you have an on-premises site, maybe the cloud can be your DR site. If you do have a cloud site, maybe you're using a second cloud for DR. These are the kinds of things you might want to be considering and how you're going to build your world. Modernization, our systems get old, our applications get old, your customers demand more from what your apps can do right now or what your servers can perform. Your competition is already stepping up their game. So maybe you need to modernize, or maybe there's just something else. So we're going to kind of work through a few of these as we go through this presentation to see what some of the decision points are in these. All right, so let's just start with total cost of ownership. When you're on-prem, capital expense is a big thing. You're buying stuff to put on-prem. Well, it could be leasing or whatnot, but it's basically there's a direct cost. You're buying a server that will last so many years, and then you will need to replace it again. And then you're also going to need support and those kinds of things. So those are the kinds of costs you're going to be looking at with an on-prem world. As you move to the cloud, you're going more to a subscription model. You're going more to an operating expense. And Microsoft offers you different ways to pay for these things. Pay as you go being the first method, most flexible. You can put something up today, turn it off tomorrow. You only paid for while it was running. To get your most flexible, you're going to pay more per hour for one of those, but you have that option. You have prepaid options with Azure to try to reduce your cost as you go to the cloud. You have things like reserved instances where you can reserve a certain style of VM and you will pay for it 1 to 3 years in advance, and for that you will get a discount for it. You have savings plans, which are similar to reserved instances, but they're flexible in that I'm only committing to an hourly spend and I can use it as I want. And as long as I'm willing to guarantee that much spend for 1 to 3 years, I will get a discount for that. You can do prepayment if you're part of an EA. You could do spot instances if depending on the application. The spot instances are when there are available resources in the Azure data center, instances can come online and you can take advantage of those for additional processing power. For most people, it's pay as you go, reserve instances, or saving plans that make the most sense when you're talking about how I'm going to be paying for things in the cloud. Because again, we're moving to an operating expense more than a capital expense. Flexibility, scalability. We talked about this in several of our webinars, and in my opinion is one of the greatest advantages of going to the cloud. The Microsoft Azure world, 70 regions, 36 countries, 63 locations, each with one or more data centers in them. And this has now opened the door for us in the small business world, especially, to now have our resources across regions and in multiple data centers without having to have multiple offices or having to buy hardware to put in a colo of some sort. So this geographical disbursement of our resources has now become available to everybody. We can scale up and scale down either manually or dynamically, with a feature like scale sets. Think of that like a cluster. As you need more resources, more VMs are added to your scale set and it can process more. And as the demand goes down, VMs drop out of your scale set and you're not paying for them additionally. You can add capacity with a click of a mouse almost. So I can up the resources on my VM, I can add storage, I can replicate my storage, all kinds of things I can do as needed in the console. It can be this flexible because the cloud has already done the pre-build for us. We are just taking advantage of what they've already built. Azure Arc in the scalability and flexibility world. This is, I put this in this slide here because Azure Arc, and let me go ahead and bring the diagram up. Azure Arc is moving the management of your on-prem resources up into the Azure world. It creates objects in your Azure world that the Azure Resource Manager is now aware of. And when you want to make a change to a configuration or something like that, you make it up in Azure. It speaks down to the platform that's running on-prem, be it in another cloud or one of your on-prem worlds. And then the on-prem management tool actually makes those decisions. But you've consolidated your management up into the cloud. So now you have a single view. In the best case scenario, you get a single view of your entire world, which gives you some ability to understand where things are and where they should be and what needs scaled, and et cetera, et cetera. Also, Azure Local. Azure Local is now, again, it's similar in that it has management up in the Azure cloud, but it's an on-prem resource. Think about this as on-prem virtualization hosts that you manage from Azure and are seen as a separate Azure location. So these are fully Azure managed. So I can have the resources on-prem for the on-prem performance that I may need, or the potential offline that I may experience if something goes down. Yet I have the cloud management, and it is seen as part of my world. So if I have some things up in the Azure cloud and some things on-prem, it's all seen as one world. HPE, I'm going to quick jump off here in a similar vein to the Azure Local. HPE also has its version of this on-prem world that gets managed from the cloud, and it's called the Private Cloud Edition. This is managed out of the HPE GreenLake Cloud, and it can work with greenfield environments where you're going to build a whole new world of virtualization. So it's be it VMware or the HPE virtualization platform. A brownfield world, which means you have existing things either running HPE infrastructure or third-party infrastructure, or public cloud, and you're going to manage them up in the GreenLake cloud through the Morpheus interface and the Ops Ramp interface. The Morpheus is going to give us manageability. The Ops Ramp is going to give us visibility for monitoring and things like that. So you have some options to be on-prem. Here's another example of what this could possibly look like. Up in the Azure cloud is where you're going to have your management up in the GreenLake world. On-prem, you could have an HPE virtualization environment and a VMware virtualization environment, all being managed from the same cloud. So that's a possibility for you. And I put this slide in there basically to say on-prem will always be an option, and it doesn't have to be a separate world. It can be done on managed through the same console. It can be on your existing hardware. It can be more on consolidated hardware like an Azure Local solution or a HPE private cloud solution, which they sell as certified equipment that can come pre-bundled, already ready, known compatibility between these. So if you are at that moment where you're replacing your on-prem hardware, then solutions like Azure Local Private Edition from HPE become an option for you to replace hardware with a certified pre-configured bundle of hardware, or even a hyperconverged solution that will then manage up into Azure with all your other things that you may have already moved to the cloud. So again, you always have an option. That's one of the great flexibilities of the cloud. It's not one or the other. All right. Security and compliance is always something that's on our minds nowadays. The Azure world does not take a backseat to security, and in many ways will step up the security because it has more capabilities pre-built for you to use than many of us have implemented within our own environments. So when it comes to networking, I can build multi-layered networks with firewalls sitting in between. I can isolate networks. I can allow sharing across networks or block sharing across networks. With storage, I can, again, isolate it to specific networks from specific sources. I can require authentication when I'm going to access that specific storage. I can encrypt it in transit and at rest. I can do multi-factor authentication when I go to make an access to it. So there's all kinds of things I can do to secure my world when I put it up into the cloud. Also, the monitoring and the alerting are built in and ready for you to use. So threat detection, you will get your notifications and emails. Account monitoring, so that you know if an account trying to access your world may have been in a risky area, so it's a risky login, et cetera. And then you may then have policies, conditional access policies, that will block those kinds of things. So all these things become available to us just by moving up to the cloud and ready for our use. The data centers are built around standards that you may require in your business. So the specs are up at the security site at Microsoft. You can find out how they are compliant with the various regulatory agencies. And then it has tools for you to build your pieces to meet those standards as well. And again, I've just mentioned conditional access, or is your device making this connection compliant? Has this user login been seen in the dark web? Has it coming from a location you don't expect it to, et cetera, et cetera? And you can allow or block or ask for a more MFA depending on the situation. But here's the big one that I think a lot of people almost overlook. We have this in Microsoft 365. You also have this over in the Azure world, and this is the Azure Advisor. The biggest worry about security is, what don't I know? And the Azure Advisor is there to help you with that. It's there to say, here's some recommendations for cost, for security, for reliability, for performance, et cetera. And you can drive into these recommendations. It will tell you what they are. It will tell you some information about how to implement them, et cetera. So it's giving you that view in a Microsoft best practice world, what you might want to consider or might not need to consider. Not that you have to turn everything on. Your business may not require everything to be turned on. It may not want everything turned on because you have a business requirement, but you now know. And this is one of those great advantages that just kind of comes along. I have this Azure Advisor that tells me where to look for possible problems in my world. Business continuity, disaster recovery is always on people's minds, with ransomware and how am I going to recover from that? If my office goes offline, how am I going to recover from that? The cloud pre-builds a world that gives you continuity that, you can just take advantage of. So if this is high on your list for decisions, then the fact that you're getting storage redundancy, that you can zone redundant your resources. Now, what does that mean? A zone is a data center in a region, and there could be 3 data centers in a region, and your resource could be replicated between all 3, sitting in just one, et cetera. So I can build redundancies into my servers. For instance, I have a web application that has a web front end across 12 servers that are providing the front end. Well, I can have 4 of those servers in one data center, 4 in a second, 4 in a third. So I am protected against even data center failure within the Microsoft world. So that's available to me. So that's a reason to move to the cloud if you need that kind of redundancy. They have local and regional load balancers, so I can have load balancers to separate traffic across all 3 of those data centers at the same time. And if I go geo replication, maybe I have servers out on the West Coast handling West Coast customers. Scale sets, where virtual machines automatically scale up, scale down, and are available so that if a virtual machine fails, there's others running for you. And of course, there's always backup. So there's the Azure backup product, and there are many third-party products that work into the Azure world as well, but Azure has its own. And then there's Azure Site Recovery, which has a great play in the on-prem to cloud world, where you can replicate your on-prem VMs up to Azure. Azure can be your disaster recovery site if you don't want it to be your primary. Just say you need to be on-prem for performance reasons or whatever. This Azure can then at least be your DR site for it. You can use Azure Site Recovery to replicate VMs across geographic regions, so that if an East Coast region goes down, for example, you can bring it up in a Midwest region, and because it's already replicated and ready to go. So yes, all that costs you money because you have storage in multiple locations, et cetera, but it's there for you to turn on and use when you need it. So if you need business continuity and disaster recovery, the cloud offers what I have on the screen here and much more that would feed that world. Modernization of legacy systems. A lot of us have old things because A, they keep working. B, you have an application that hasn't upgraded and needs to stay on an old server. C, there's no budget, et cetera, et cetera. And there's all kinds of reasons why we will keep legacy systems around that do not have the features that the modern business world may be starting to demand of you. So you may need to modernize things. So what can you do with that? Well, one option is to just rehost. In other words, I'm going to take your VMs as is. We're going to move them up to Azure. You, in essence, will then have the exact same world, except sitting on newer hardware in newer data centers and getting the advantages of the Azure environment there. So you can take what you have and just move it up, rehost it to a new, if you can think of it as just moving your data center to another location. You can re-platform applications in the Azure world. So instead of having a SQL Windows server, you can go to a SQL managed instance, and you're not going to manage the underlying servers. You're just going to manage SQL, and it's going to be as a service for you. You don't necessarily need a file server, Windows file server anymore. You could use Azure Files to be your file shares. So you can re-platform and change the way the applications are presented. Why would you do some of these things? Well, because you could have very dynamic capacity into the storages. You could have high availability built in under the hood where you didn't need to build it. You've gone from a single Windows server to a high availability SQL managed instance. And you've just upgraded your reliance just by changing the platform. You could refactor and start changing your applications to be more cloud native. Now, that's not a short-term project, but that is something that can be in the works along with all these others. Many of our clients start with the rehosting option. They get themselves into Azure, and then we start looking at making the changes of moving to a replatform or a refactor or something like that. You can re-architect design, to use some of Azure's built-in services to do workflows, notifications, things like that. Or you can move to SaaS products, like Dynamics or the Power Platform and things like that. So when you're modernizing, we can be moving right off of the Windows platform or the Linux platforms into services, where you are not managing the underlying compute that's supporting it. You're just managing the applications now and focusing on the business needs. So that's a reason why you might want to move up, so that you can get the newer capabilities. Maybe you need to improve performance and reliability. So you have old hardware. Now you're going to move to up-to-date hardware in the Azure data center that can scale and and replicate and things like that. So we're going to be improving our performance because we're maybe moving to better CPU power and better memory power, et cetera. Right now, it's difficult to get some of the hardware, and upgrading your hardware could be a little tricky. The cloud may be the way to go in the near term to get the extra memory and compute that you may need. And it's a reliable world. SLAs in the Microsoft world are the 99.9 for VLMs, 99.995 for the SQL databases. Azure storage can anywhere from 99.9 to 99.99. So you have high availability SLAs built up there for you. And as long as you have good internet connectivity or remote access, these things will be available for you. Data and analytics capabilities. So now when you're up into Azure, there's these other services like, Synapse App Analytics and Power BI, and then the whole AI platform is up there. Now, not a lot of us may be into AI deeply yet. And as a small business, that may look daunting to try to move into that world. But that's the great advantage of the cloud is small businesses now have access to the hardware and machines necessary to do machine learning or cognitive services or anything like that that you may need to run in your business to make you more profitable. So these kinds of tools are available to you now, and you can just gain access to them. And if your data is up in Azure, along with the AI engines running the Azure, things can perform far better at that point. But you can also reach down into your on-prem with your AI and gain access to your on-prem data. So that hasn't left as well. Again, flexibility is there. But these are some of the, if you need some of these analytics and these AI capabilities, the cloud may be the place to be looking immediately. And of course, there's always an integration with the Microsoft ecosystem. So you're not jumping ship and moving to a place that is foreign to what you already have. A lot of these moves to Azure can be done without users even being aware that these moves have been made for some resources, because there's integration with things like Microsoft 365 and Active Directory. We can do Active Directory synchronization up into Entra ID. That gives us Entra ID credentials to log into our Microsoft 365. But it's the same Entra ID that I can use to connect into many of my Azure resources. If my Azure resources need Active Directory authentication, let's say it's a Windows file server, Active Directory is there to do that. If it's a service like a managed SQL that uses Entra authentication, that's already up there. So it's already built into it and ready to use. So we have integration and we're not rebuilding anything. As I've mentioned, we have support for hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, the Azure Arc that I talked about, the Azure Local, the Azure Monitor across Azure, AWS, and Google's worlds, Defender across Azure, AWS, and Google's worlds, cost management and billing across Azure and AWS. So I'm not even, you're not even getting locked into what cloud you want to be in. And Azure can be a central point of management for a lot of these things. In this diagram here, there are agents that we put over here that will talk with a collector in the Azure world, which will pull data into Log Analytics, which is the logging service, so that I can monitor things across the planes here. So I can build a unified world in Azure, on-prem, in AWS, and it's one world. I can extend this. It's not in this diagram, but on an earlier slide, I said you can move to SaaS environments. Well, one of the things that Entra ID lets you do is do single sign-on with SaaS environments. So if I have a user that has logged into Active Directory and it's synchronized with Entra ID, I can now have that configured so that when I go to some third-party SaaS application, maybe I'm doing SAML authentication, so I have the user sees single sign-on from where they're working to a SaaS application. That kind of single sign-on is not just convenient for the users, but it actually adds to your security, because one of the dangers of SaaS applications is they may have their own independent directories of user IDs and passwords, and they're holding your business data. And when someone leaves the organization, unless you have tight policies, you may forget to pull accounts out of various applications. But in a single sign-on environment, the SaaS application isn't the authentication point, it's Entra ID. So when you disable a user in Entra ID or AD, and it replicates to Entra ID, they're automatically blocked from gaining access to your SaaS applications. So this unified world that we can pull in, this integration, actually increases as we move up to the cloud, because now I can reach out to a lot of things as if it's just one environment. And of course, there's a lot of migration tools to get you up there. Azure Migration is the Azure tool to do that, but there are many third-party tools that can move your SQL up there, that can move your virtual machines up there, that can move your storage up there. So we can take what you have now through migration tools and just move its location, and it will be in an integrated ecosystem. All right, so let's kind of redirect a little bit. Those are some of the decision points. Do you need flexibility? Do you need cost? Do you need DR? Those kinds of things. Now let's start taking a look at your requirements. Kinds of things you want to think about when you move to the cloud. What do you absolutely have to have? And one of the places to start is what is currently constraining your business now or giving you or missing opportunities in your business. What is it you can't do now that you could if you went to the cloud? Because that could be the justification. That also could then be the central point of what you're doing up in Azure, and maybe the very first thing that we move to Azure as we start in a hybrid world, and over time it could start becoming an entire cloud-only environment. Is downtime a pain for you? Is performance a pain for you? Is aging equipment a pain for you? So these are what is it you're trying to fix? What hurts the business now? What do you want to solve near term? What do you want to solve long term? What are the prerequisites for your long term? I mean, you may want to get to point Y, but maybe you need to go. If you did, you may need to get to point X first before you can get to Y. So X becomes your near term, Y becomes your long term, and you want to make sure you're going down the same path. So what is it you're trying to solve? If you're just trying to keep domain authentication and file shares, that's a pretty simple one. We can just make the move. But maybe you have some enhancement capabilities that the cloud will make available to you. Start thinking about what those are so that when we start these migrations, we're at least moving in the right direction and don't have to retool halfway through. What kind of payback are you looking for in the near term or the long term? That may determine in what order which we move things. If it is aging hardware, just getting VMs up to the cloud may be the first step. Then you start thinking about changing how you do your business. But we've taken care of the near-term pain and taken care of the near-term goal. And now you've bought yourself time to start looking at the next things. What are your business requirements? How long? What is your RPO, RTO? What kind of fault tolerance does your business require? What kind of disaster recovery? What kind of regulatory? What kind of data sovereignty do you need? Now, data sovereignty has become a discussion up in the cloud. Where my data can be it's allowed to be. And that's your regulations that will tell you what they need to do. Do they need to stay in country? Do they need to just stay local, et cetera? So what are your requirements? And then we can build the cloud world to meet those requirements, keeping what on-prem, what needs to stay on-prem. Some things in one cloud, some things in another cloud, depends on where we can replicate. All those design decisions come out of what these requirements are staying right here. What features and performances that you need? Do you know what you need? Where you're being throttled right now? What kind of security do you need? How much isolation do you need? What kind of firewall rules do you need? What kind of connectivity do you need from on-prem or from end users? From where can end users connect? That's a big one, actually, that a lot of people don't have a great handle on, just because we have just been used to people VPNing in or coming into a terminal server. So we need to understand where that's coming from. What kind of authentication do you need? Now, we're all getting very comfortable with the MFA aspect to it, but maybe you need a higher conditional access MFA. So I'm going to get an MFA prompt for initial login, but maybe a second one for very specific resources. What kind of an integration do you need with AD or SaaS applications for authentication purposes? So understand those requirements of what you need for network and security. Here's one that often gets overlooked. What skill set do you need when you move to the cloud? Do you have those skills in-house? Do you need to train up? Do you need to augment? I know System Source does a lot of that augment work, at least temporarily, for people as they are tooling themselves up. We definitely do a lot of training, to get people ready to be on Azure. If you're just moving a VM to Azure, the training doesn't have to be great because it's still a Windows VM. But as you start moving into platform as a service and start using applications like SQL managed services, you may need training on that. And in the near term, you may need augmentation, someone who already has those skills until you have those skills. So take a look at your team, see what kind of skill sets you have. So when you get up into Azure, you're making sure it's being built right and secure, and you don't learn that you weren't secure only months later, So help you get there quickly. Have a good, okay, your readiness now. Start with have a good inventory of what you have. Now that sounds obvious, doesn't it? But we don't always have a great inventory of what we have. We need to know what servers, what networking hardware, OSs and apps that are renewing, when they're being renewed, when the end of lives are coming, because all of these things may tell us when we want to move certain things, what order the migration should be. This second bullet is where a lot of times the ball gets dropped. Dependencies. Separating data from apps or data from apps from file shares, not knowing what is dependent on what as clearly as we would like. So where that really becomes a problem is in two things. One, we could unknowingly separate data from apps so that now it has to go across a WAN and performance is bad. Or when we separate them, they don't function and they break, and we now have to hurry up and move one or hurry up and move another one back and those kinds of things. So the best you can document dependencies, the easier the migrations will be, and may even give us a better idea of what that final world should look like. Determine if you're compatible with Azure as is. So if you need to do a quick move, what do you have now? Do you have very, very old Windows operating systems that aren't supported anymore? That may not be compatible to run up there. So we just need to understand what you have as is. Do your apps require high-speed access? In other words, okay, there are many applications that want the client close at LAN speeds so it can communicate well. And on an on-premise environment, that works great. If we move to the cloud, we might want to start thinking about a virtual desktop to keep the client software close to the server software. Or you need to maybe look at a different application that isn't so connectivity sensitive. Are there known errors that you're getting right now that we need to address and put as a priority into the migrations? That's all part of what your readiness looks like. What does your internet and WAN connectivity look like? Because we are now if we move you to Azure, for all intent and purposes, we are adding another data center into your world, another node into your WAN infrastructure. So we need to know how the data is going to flow from all your sites up into Azure. Will each site go direct? Will they all come through a central site? Where are my users connecting from? Because now we have a lot of mobile users and work from home users, and where are they connecting from? Where is their VPN endpoint going to be? And do we want to leave it there or move it to the cloud? Is your bandwidth sufficient? Because now we're moving your data center up to the cloud. So do you have high-speed internet? And is it fault tolerant? In other words, do you have two of them that are load balanced so that if, again, I'll use the Comcast Verizon example, if one of those two is down, the likelihood of the other being down is fairly slim, so you will still have some kind of internet connectivity there. So take a look at those kinds of things in your readiness to see if you go. Can you work with a single internet? Yes, just understand that you do have a risk there, that internet now becomes your central point of failure, a single point of failure. So do you have contractual constraints? Do you have a colo in which you're under contract for a certain amount of time, or an MSP that won't support Azure and you're under contract for a certain amount of time? So do you have any of those kinds of constraints? What is your downtime tolerance? And that's mostly for not just production use, but maybe determining how we're going to migrate things. Generally, if downtime is available, we can move things faster than if we have to work around minimal to no downtime. But understand what your downtime is so we can kind of plan what a migration might look like. And of course, what kind of tools would you need to make this migration? Again, there's an Azure Migrate tool that you get with Azure. There's Azure Site Recovery that can be used for migration, and there's third-party tools. And we're not necessarily recommending any of these. We're just kind of putting them in here for completeness. But this may be a cost in the migration that you're having. All right. So now let's move over to costs. The challenge now is if you're on-prem now, you're kind of trying to compare capital expense with operating expense. And that can be a little tricky because capital expense comes out all at one time, or and you depreciate it over time. Operating expense is just now a monthly or yearly budget that you need to put out there, and it will be ongoing. And we're going to need to do a return on investment analysis to see when that breaking point is. The cloud, if you have a very rapid refresh cycle, the cloud could end up being cheaper. If you have a very, very long, unhealthily long refresh cycle, the cloud may start appearing more and will be more expensive because it's maintaining its currency, and you're just paying for that. Know your actual use patterns. You may have a server with a lot of RAM, a lot of CPU, and a lot of storage, and it's using very little of it. Know how much data is traveling back and forth between clients and servers, because part of your Azure costs, and they're not big, but part of them is data entering and leaving the Azure world. All right. What are your operational costs? Now, this is a little tricky to find, and the other indirect costs. What does it cost to manage this thing? What is the power and environmentals cost? And there's other things that you're paying for that you're now not going to need as much if you're moving your resources up to the cloud. So kind of figure that out, and then start understanding what your total cost of ownership is. Starting with, what is it now? What does it cost you now? Because we can't compare until we know what you're doing now. So first, try to figure out what your total cost of ownership is now. And don't get caught up in a paralysis of analysis. We just you kind of need to know what the general costs are, so we can compare it to what the general costs in the cloud are. Because when you try to get too granular, all you're doing is getting caught up in numbers, and you're not actually making decisions on what's best for the business at this point. To help you, there is an Azure pricing calculator that will kind of give you an estimate of what your Azure costs could look like. To use it well, you kind of need to know what your usage patterns are. What is the peak performance you need to cover for? What is your average? Do you have seasonal spikes, etc.? What region you're going to be putting your resources in, because prices can vary by region, and resources can vary by region. You may not get all the same virtual machine models in the West that you do in the East. Factor in networking costs. I just mentioned that there. Now, how much data is going to leave Azure to come back on-prem or to go to clients, etc.? Again, not a big number, but it's helpful to know that if you're going to get a decent estimate from the calculator. Consider hybrid benefits. Now, this is when you deploy a virtual machine in Azure, by default, that virtual machine gets a Windows license, and that's just part of the monthly cost of that virtual machine. But you can use your existing Windows licenses and at least remove the Windows licensing cost from that virtual machine. So there's possibilities that we could reduce some costs using hybrid benefits. Right? And of course, always plan for growth. So put some buffering in for scaling and future workloads into there. And the pricing calculator can give you a reasonable start. It can let you know what ballpark you're going to be sitting in. It is not highly accurate in that, so don't think that's going to be the budget, but the budget will be close. If you really want to know what's going to cost, you need real world data. And this is where a pilot is very, very helpful. So when you're thinking about moving to Azure, it's worth the expense to open an Azure subscription and move potentially some low impact services up into Azure that are regularly used, but low impact to the business. So you can get a feel for what the costs look like, for what the performance looks like, what management looks like. So that helps your skill set and your training. So pilots are very, very helpful. More than one server. You need it to be any kind of real estimate there. And the reason I say low impact on the business, is if you misconfigure or don't have it right, you're not affecting the central cash generating resource of the business when you're doing this, right? But the pilot is very, very helpful. All right, so what have we talked about? So in the decision criteria, we have talked about considering what costs are. And maybe that's what's going to drive you. I'm going to say now, and I have this in a future slide, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do not go to the cloud thinking that it's going to be a cost savings. It may or may not be. But costs could, capital expenditure costs may be a decision factor in here. So that's one thing. Do you need scalability and flexibility? In other words, flexibility as to where my resources are, how big they are, can they shrink, can I change them, all these things. Is that what you're looking for so that you can be more flexible and dynamic in your response to your businesses? What security requirements do you have, or what security would you like to add to your environment? That's one of the decisions. And you need to then take a look at the cloud to see if it gives you what you need, and what you need to do to make it as secure as you need to be. Is business continuity and disaster recovery something that is making you to think about the cloud? That is one of the big ones, and one of the easiest first steps you can do for testing the cloud is let it be your disaster recovery site. Do you have old applications that need to be stepped up? Anytime you have hardware refresh or application refresh, these are perfect times to be considering, is the cloud ready for me? Am I ready for the cloud now? Do you need improved performance and reliability? Again, the Azure cloud builds things in zones, which is a data center, and there are multiple data centers in every region, and I can replicate across those so that even if a data center goes down, I can still have my resources if I need that kind of reliability. Do I need to see more analytics about what I have? Do I need Power BI tools? Do I need just Azure Monitor information to tell me about what my world is? Do I need more visibility? The cloud can give you more visibility because those tools are there for you to use just by being up there. Do you need to integrate with what you currently have? Very, very, very few of us can just start new up in the cloud. So there's going to most likely be some kind of integration. What kind of integration do you need? What kind of support for a hybrid world or multi-cloud strategies? We talked about Azure Local and then the HPE solutions. And we talked about Azure Arc, which can manage current existing hardwares. And what kind of tools or partner systems do I need to help me get to the cloud? So those are some of my decisions, that I need to make. So the tools are going to tell me what the migration might look like. The hybrid cloud aspect might tell me what my total world will look like on-prem and in the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things are you're going to be using for your decisions. When evaluating your requirements, you're going to look where you're currently hurting and see if you can address those. What is currently hurting your business? And you can address those first. What is it you want to accomplish? Near term, long term. Near term may be addressing the pain points. Long term may be some new feature. So we want to make sure that that first step we take can move us directly into the long term without having to re-engineer. What do you need for requirements, for regulatory requirements, for performances, et cetera, and things like that? So we need those kinds of things. What are your requirements there? What do you need for performance, and what kind of features do you need? What kind of security do you need? What kind of skill set do you need to manage your world? And do you need to train? Do you need to augment? Not just to get through the integration, but to get you experienced into the cloud world so you can run this on your own. All right, so am I ready to move? Do I have a good inventory of what I have? Do I have a solid internet WAN connectivity map and lines? Do I have multiple vendors potentially? Do I have any contract constraints that would dictate when I can move, or when I can move a certain component of my work, et cetera? Do I have downtime tolerances that can be used for migration and things like that? Do I have a budget for tools if I need tools for migrations? Especially if you're changing to re-platform something, not just move an existing Windows machine from one place to another, but you're now trying to move from a Windows server running an app to a platform app, you may need skill sets. So that's consider that a tool. You may need to hire someone who's expert in that to actually make that move for you. So that's part of the tools. And of course, costs. The challenge is competing, comparing CapEx with OpEx and trying to figure out where the break even is, determining what your total cost of ownership is now. Some of us have had networks running for so long that that hasn't been a thought for us, and we need to maybe recalculate it. Azure gives you tools to help guess what that Azure cost might look like, and pilots are always very, very helpful. And of course, I said this already, don't assume there will always be a cost saving. What you are looking for is an environment that better supports your business. And the cloud over years has been getting better and better in its story for how it supports your business, because it has already built that infrastructure for you to just use when you need to use it. And with that, that brings us up to some next steps, and I'm going to hand this back to Chris.
Thank you very much, Dave. There are several kind of special training class offers here. So some are aimed at administrators, so system administrators may want to look at that if you're looking at moving towards Azure. There are also ones that are aimed at hybrids. So we've talked about whether you're going to keep it go to Azure, keep it on-prem, or go to hybrid. There are classes there that would be specifically for those in a hybrid world. And then more generally, looking at some security and governance, since those are always hot topics as you move to cloud resources. So we put some offers there that would be hopefully useful for you if you're looking towards some of these things. Right now, I don't see any questions in the questions tab. So I want to thank Dave for his time and for the information. Thank each of you for participating. Hope the pizza was good. Information certainly was. There is the evaluation you'll get. Hopefully you'll take just a moment. It takes literally about a minute to give us some feedback. We appreciate your time there. And hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.